Hello, I would like to welcome everyone to the Integrating Technology and Teaching Strategies to Develop Common Core Curricula webinar today, February 26th, hosted by Assessment Technology Incorporated and presented by Scott Cunningham, Assessment and Instructional Design Director, facilitated by myself, Jody Jepson. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. We'd like to thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule today to join us. Before we begin the webinar, Integrating Technology and Teaching Strategies to Develop Common Core Curricula, we'd like to go over a few general housekeeping instructions. We encourage you to send in your comments and questions throughout the course of the webinar. And in order to do this, you will need to open your Q&A dialog box. We're going to scroll down to see the first step. Please navigate to the top of your screen to locate the green bar. It should resemble the first screenshot pictured here. Hover over the green bar to reveal the Q&A icon, and it is pictured here in the next screenshot. Click the icon that says Q&A to open the Q&A pop-up box. If by chance you're experiencing some problems and you can't see the Q&A icon does not appear at the top of your screen, locate the down arrow at the right side of your menu options. Click the down arrow to reveal and select the Q&A icon. To ensure that your questions are going to be fielded today by our ATI panelists, go to the drop-down box above the text entry field located and select the option All Panelists. This is located in the screenshot on number 3. It's very important that you select all panelists to submit your questions. There will be 2 designated Q&A breaks throughout the presentation today. Our presenter, Scott Cunningham, will answer as many questions as he can get to during these times. We may not be able to get to all the questions today, but we'll follow up with an email providing detailed responses to all your submitted questions. Many of you have already asked ahead of time if a recording will be made of the webinar today. And the answer is yes, we're going to record the session today. It will be available on the ATI website and emailed out to all participants. A reminder at this time that the audio has been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. For those of you who have just joined us, we welcome you to the Integrating Technology and Teaching Strategies to Develop Common Core Curricula webinar today, February 26th, hosted by Assessment Technology Incorporated and presented by Scott Cunningham, Assessment and Instructional Design Director. If you are experiencing any technical difficulty, please call the WebEx support line at 866-569-3239. That number again is 866-569-3239. I see a lot of you have already joined us already. Again, I want to thank you for your interest today in the webinar. With that, let's begin our presentation. Please let me introduce Scott Cunningham.
Thank you very much, Jody. I'd like to welcome everybody. We're going to come to you today from Tucson, Arizona. I want to talk a little bit about implementing Common Core curriculum and some of the ways that we can go about doing that. So what I'm going to open up here, this is an instructional dialogue. It's a resource that we have available in our system to allow people to present, allow information to be shared, and we'll go into some more of the details of this technology as we work through the presentation today. So the first thing we want to talk about is what we want to address in today's session. And the first thing we want to talk about is what are the expectations of the Common Core State Standards, the CCSS, and the Next Generation Science Standards, the NGSS. NGSS is in final review right now, but Common Core has been out for a little while, and we've all been making preparations to move our curriculum, move our instruction to this new set of standards. The second thing we want to talk about today is how curriculum and instruction will be affected by moving to these new standards. What will be the expectations? How can we meet those expectations? And what tools and resources can we employ to do that? The third thing we want to talk about today is why collaborative technology is the solution to this. Again, we're going to have some demonstrations, some examples throughout the presentation today to show you how collaborative technology can be an asset as you move to Common Core curricular instruction. So what are the expectations of the Common Core State Standards and the Next Generation Science Standards? Well, first is the emphasis on reasoning. We're expecting students to move beyond factual recall, to move into a level of ability to demonstrate that they comprehend information and are able to apply it in multiple scenarios and multiple situations. They're able to reason and develop, based on that information, solutions to problems that they face in their instruction and for the future in their daily lives. Another element is the analysis of evidence. The things that we're seeing in the Common Core are setting contextual situations and scenarios for students, having them work with literature, with text, both fiction and nonfiction, and to analyze those texts, to work from evidence, to inform decisions, to inform opinions, and to make them capable of making good decisions. Well, they want to develop an understanding, and that understanding again helps them to focus, to learn to develop the deeper implementation of processes and skills that we teach them, to recognize when these things are necessary, when to put them into play, and how to solve and resolve issues. The application of those processes, when we teach students how to do something, we want them to be able to apply that far beyond the individual lesson or the individual day of activity, that these processes build one upon another, and the application of them is a demonstration of good competency. The last is the integration of knowledge, being able to connect different skills and knowledge to solve problems and draw conclusions, being able to take things that they learned last week, last month, last year, and integrate that with the new things that they're learning and see those connections and see those patterns, develop a system of response that they can use when they're confronted with new knowledge and place it in the context of those things that they already know. So in order to do that, what instructional resources will be needed? Well, first, a redesign of curriculum. We've all developed the curriculum that we've been teaching to over the past few years based on state standards. Now as we're moving to the Common Core state standards, we need to evaluate it. We need to look at it and say, what is it that carries over? And a significant portion will carry over. There's a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of skills we've been teaching that will continue to need to be taught. But how do they filter through the new expectations of Common Core? How do they relate to students' abilities to reason and to apply these practices? What do we need to look at, and how do we need to make these changes and these alterations to develop Common Core competencies? One of the things we'll be implementing is more text emphasizing extended close reading. When we're talking about the texts in Common Core, we are talking about things with a greater level of rigor, more complex concepts, longer texts, in many cases texts that draw from historical sources, primary source documents, government resources, speeches. We're looking at a variety of texts that are being implemented both in language arts but also in the literacy standards for social sciences, and beyond that into technical documents employed in science relevant to the Common Core state standards. So our texts are going to need some evaluation and possibly some replacement and expansion. We want to engage students in activities involving critical thinking. We want them to make decisions and make evaluations based on the information that they're gathering from the reading. That things are determined by what they understand, what they can apply, and they can move through those critical thinking skills to make good choices. There aren't always single correct answers to every question, to every situation that they're dealing with, and that's part of what Common Core is trying to make them familiar with and acquaint them with, is the idea that processing multiple choices based on certain scenarios involves choosing the thing that best fits that situation and that circumstance. Applied to a different situation, a different correct answer may apply. We're talking a bit about cross-disciplinary collaboration in that, as I mentioned before, the reading and the literacy standards go beyond just language arts into science and into social sciences, and how literacy in those subject areas is both informed by what we do with ELA literacy and what we do with technical and specific content drawing from those other disciplines. As I'm out and working with teachers developing items in other subject areas outside of the standard state assessed areas, we're having discussions about how Common Core applies beyond math, reading, and to some extent science. We're talking about how Common Core has a meaning and a purpose in foreign language, and that the skills that students are doing in a foreign language class are similar, just applied again to a different language, a different culture. We're going to see more of that as we move into other subject areas where the literacy skills, the mathematical skills can be applied in career and technical education scenarios. They can be applied in physical education and health and wellness kinds of programs. All of these things can fit together in the Common Core, even though Common Core may not have specific standards for that subject stated. Lastly, we want to talk a little bit about instructional resources that integrate assessment with instruction. Common Core is looking at depths of knowledge beyond the first two levels. They're looking at things that go beyond factual recall and simple application into more complex understandings. Those things don't always work to be done in multiple choice tests. They don't always work to be done in a single testing session. When we get into the higher levels of cognitive processes, these students are going to have to engage in things that are ongoing projects and activities to demonstrate many of the capacities and capabilities Common Core requires. To do that, we want to have that assessment and instruction be a seamless process that fits within the curriculum, fits within the established lessons, but the standards are identified and the assessment components are identified so that teachers are getting good, actionable feedback to work with their students and further develop those student skills. Why is collaborative technology the solution? Again, we're going to show you a lot of examples today, but one of the best ones is organization. By using a system that puts information in a single storage system, you're able to share that information, you're able to work with people, you're able to move the materials into orders and sequences and processes that you need without having to constantly reprint and revise. The dynamic capacities of a technology solution help to make this a more seamless process. It also helps it to be implemented more quickly because there's not a lot of wait time between the ability of someone to create new content and the ability for them to share it. That accessibility allows individuals within your school, within your district, to get into and work with materials based on their permissions levels, based on the level of responsibility assigned to them, to access that content, make changes, update it, work with it, add it to their lessons, add it to their unit plans, and make things available to the students. There's a level of access for each user in the system, whether it's a district administrator, a school administrator, teacher, or student. Those permissions that are granted allow each individual to get to the materials they need to have access to them from any computer connected to the internet. Another big factor in using technology is conservation, particularly conservation of time. Working together, teachers are able to share resources and encourage each other's development of content by sharing commentary, participating in shared work groups. That conservation of time also carries over into them being able to work whenever they are available and not have to wait for others to get together to develop the documents, to develop the content. Lastly, is synchronization. The benefit of synchronizing the system is that a district can make decisions, or a school can make decisions that allow their materials to be sequenced, to be prepared, to be delivered to teachers, to be delivered to students in a way that everyone has the same resources, everyone has the same access, everything has been approved or vetted by whatever sources within the district are necessary, and all of that information can be changed or modified as needed based on results that are being seen from instruction, results that are being seen from assessment. Materials can be updated and revised and changed as the standards change. As Common Core develops and grows, there may be additional aspects that need to be included. All of this can constantly be synchronized and updated, and rather than being stuck with a different set of textbooks or a different set of materials in different classrooms, everyone has access to this same synchronized resource. So, as I mentioned before, what we're using specifically here is a dialogue. What can dialogues do? Well, they can store information on organizational plans. Dialogues can be designed at a number of levels, and they can stack into a hierarchy of materials. So information that's appropriate to district-level planning or school-wide planning, department-wide planning, can all be stored and organized into a dialogue. It can be sequenced, it can provide notes and resources and links to things that teachers need to be aware of so that they can engage that information in making their individual plans or making their individual lessons and activities. They can also share standards-aligned, customizable lesson. Everything in Galileo is linked to the Common Core state standards, also to the previous state standards, and also to standards that are not addressed by Common Core or by the state in their end-of-year assessments. So there's a lot of content that's available. They can be searched and they can be accessed by those standards. That material can then be presented as it was written. It can also be customized by individual teachers, or each school within a district can make certain adaptations or certain changes based on their interests and the interests of the district to make sure that the lessons are meaningful and useful to the audience they're being presented to. Dialogues can also, as we mentioned before, integrate instruction and assessment. Projects can be built into the dialogues to allow the students to be assessed on skills that don't translate into a simple test. Things where students are gathering, processing, and responding to data, where they're making conclusions, where they're working on reasoning to express concepts and ideas in a broader sense, in a more developed cognitive process. And the last thing dialogues can do is to facilitate interactive learning. Students are able to engage with the dialogue, they're able to engage with the materials and work with them. So over here in the right-hand corner, one of the resources that we've attached is an additional dialogue. Dialogues are one of the resources that can be attached. Documents, images, video, audio, all of these things are available in the dialogue technology. The resource we're going to look at right now is just a dialogue from an elementary grade about measurement. Now, traditionally in testing and measuring online and in print, measurement would already have the ruler aligned to the object, and the students would simply read off a number. Here we're engaging a little bit further in that the students have the ability to manipulate that ruler. They can adjust it to fit the circumstance that they're measuring, and they can align it to the object. So if I am a student and I want to measure the width of the butterfly, I can come in here and I can make a measurement. And I'm not real sure, so I'm going to say that that's a 2-inch wide butterfly. In addition to the students interacting with the technology interacts back to the student in that we've provided feedback, we've provided resources to help the students as they work through the process, as they work through the activities, to know when they're doing things correctly and when they're not doing things correctly so that they can make adjustments. So we've decided now based on it that it's not a 2-inch butterfly, and we've provided them now with a little guidance on how to measure, where to align their ruler, and we find that in fact the butterfly is 3 inches. And now I've accurately measured the butterfly. We move on to the next section. I'm going to measure a carrot. I'm going to see again, how long is the carrot? I think it's about 5 inches. And I'm going to check my answer, and I'm correct again. Now I've been rewarded because I moved on from carrots to ice cream. Here I have a problem. I cannot measure how tall the ice cream cone is with the ruler, but I remember that I can adjust my ruler. The directions up at the top also remind the student to do that. And so I've got myself a nice double stack ice cream cone that's going to be 6 inches tall. Again, students are interacting with the content, they're working through it, they're getting feedback. Individualized students within a lab or working on this on their own can progress through the activities as their pace fits, and then those students who need additional help can be identified and worked with. So we've reached the first question and answer session. I'm going to take a look here and see what questions we've received and be able to respond a little bit. The first question I got is, will districts be able to upload their own resources, and what about copyright issues? Well, that's a great question. I've been dealing with copyright issues a lot as I've been going out with the community item bank training in non-state tested subject areas. We've talked a lot about copyright and the laws involved. And people who participate in this project, if they engage in the training, we'll go through that again with them on what the specifics of copyright are. But the basic nature of the copyright for our purposes is that even if you have a license as a district to use content, we don't have that same license, nor do other people who are participating and sharing that content. So things that you are creating that are from copyrighted resources, you can share them within your school or within your district to the degree that you have a license. So if you have a school-wide license for a particular set of images or a passage or a text or whatever along those lines, if it's a school-wide license, a dialogue can be created and the sharing can be set up so that only the people in your school see that. If the school next door in your district doesn't have that permission, we would not want to set that up. We wouldn't want to violate someone else's intellectual property rights. But you will be able to upload those resources. Now, if you have things and resources, and again, as part of the training, we go into places to find public domain resources. As you go through that set of resources and put those up, you may want to share those more broadly. You can upload whatever you need. All we need to do is work with you to identify where the license stands and be able to share it as broadly as is legally permissible. It's an excellent question. Thank you for that. Second question that I've got is, do we have a robust set of dialogues like we're showing now ready for use, or is this still in development? The technology is fully functional. We've been using dialogues for quite a bit of time now. What we're working on right now is updating and upgrading the dialogues to match the Common Core. There are all sorts of resources available that we'll see today. There are thousands of dialogues that have been developed. Again, where those overlap with the state standards that we're transitioning from, there is content that can be used in Common Core related instruction. Where there are dialogues that maybe fit a limited skill set or don't really go to the extent that the Common Core is expecting, we're looking to upgrade those and we're looking to expand them. One of the things we want to do with this process is dialogues have always been available for users of Galileo to develop, so we're going to be developing. We're going to have members of our clients, our partners working to develop, so there will be a rapid growth of this content. There is existing content now, but we're expecting to see a real upsurge of the growth of it over the next few months. Another question that we've been asked about, can students access dialogues from home? I mentioned a little bit about that before. These can be assigned in a class to be as part of a presentation. These can be assigned as a individualized activity for them to work on, but these can also be assigned as homework activities. Maybe there's some aspect of the materials that you're covering in the unit that are necessary or important, but you just can't find the time to fit them in. You can share a dialogue and the students can log in from a computer at home or from a lab or from the library, and they can access that material. You could even provide them with differing options. So if you had students in a life science class and some wanted to focus on amphibians and some wanted to focus on insects and some wanted to focus on mammals to do a report or project, you could set up the parameters of that in a dialogue and then they could pick the one that they wanted to work with. Those can all be controlled by the user, by the teacher, and each of them can be assigned to students or classes, an entire school, an entire district, as is appropriate to the information being presented. So there are a lot of choices there of how to work with these and how students can access them. Last question I'm going to be able to cover in this question and answer so we can keep going. Where do items come from and do they match all standards? Not all items match all standards. Again, with Common Core, there's a much greater overlap than we were seeing. We've been working with a number of states for the last 10 years. And so we have examples in our bank from all of those states, but not just from all of those states, but from all of the variations in the year's standards. As the standards have updated each time, we've created new content, we've expanded our content, and we found that what used to be appropriate for one state got dropped from the standards, and now something new has come in to that state, but a different state now is using something that we abandoned from another state. So all of our content is maintained, but as new standards are adopted, we evaluate it, we determine whether it matches the new standard, and we make mappings that are appropriate. When things are not available, not necessary anymore in any of the states, they sit in an inactive area. But the content that you put into dialogues, all of that can be written to match the standards. We do include the standards beyond the original core 85% that was supposed to be Common Core to the additional standards each state or locality has developed. We've even worked with individual schools to develop specific standards where they have a situation that goes even beyond what the state is expecting, that they want to have some detailed standards that they can address, or where there aren't state standards specifically to work with in a few subject areas or a few specializations. So there can always be content developed to each standard. The content we're developing, we try to cover the broadest range of the state standards and now the Common Core state standards, including all of the state-specific materials. I'm going to have to move on to the question and answer. If your question didn't get answered during this session, we're going to go ahead and try to catch you in the second question and answer period. So what we want to look at here is more specifically, what are the expectations of those new standards? What really is each subject area asking to be done? And we'll start with English Language Arts. What does Common Core State Standards expect ELA students to do? Well, they want them to read complex literary and informational texts. They want them to be processing literature that actually has some challenge, some difficulty to it because we want them to develop as readers. We don't want them to stagnate and stay at the same level. We don't want to oversimplify it. And one of the things that we try to be clear on is measuring the difference between reading comprehension and the other skills, but we want them to continue to grow and expand that reading comprehension at more complex levels. And the way we're seeing that demonstrated, I'm going to go over here to this resource. And what we're seeing is the development of measures that align the Common Core expectations to tools that we're already using. One of the common tools used to measure readability is Lexiles. Lexiles provide measures that have students evaluated to determine what level they're reading at. It also evaluates texts to determine where the text stands, and matching up an overlap of those two numbers helps to guide students to the right materials. But we want to be pushing students to the top end of their reading Lexile rather than focusing on the lower ends. As you can see on the chart here, we got the grade band, and I do need to mention, because the people at Metametrics who developed the Lexiles are very clear on this, these are just suggestions. If you have a class of 30 students, you've got 30 different Lexiles. You've got kids reading at a much wider range. These are just their approximations for grade equivalency, but they're not an absolute rule. They're just a guideline of where students fit into this process. And if we look at that second column, the current Lexile band, we can see some numbers there that are equated to the students' readability and the text readability levels. If we move into the right-hand column, we see where Common Core is placing those expectations. As they're evaluating texts and students for their capabilities, we're seeing a significant increase in the expectations of what students can read and what they're comfortable reading based on Lexiles. Galileo, in addition to Lexiles, and all of our texts for assessments have been Lexiled or have been provided with a Lexile measure. All of our content that we're going to be providing in instructional materials will also have a Lexile measure established. We also use an older system called Flesch-Kincaid, and we use a number of vocabulary lists at the earlier grades to make sure that reading content is appropriate to the developmental level of the students. So we are very focused on making sure that everybody is getting a challenging text, but a reasonable text, something that they can be expected to work with. We want the students in those complex texts to work on close critical reading, to be picking out details, not to be able to skim or just cherry pick elements of the text, but to actually have to read and process the full text, to really understand what's going on. And this is a skill they're going to have to develop. We've talked about how bookstores and newspapers and the printed word on paper is decreasing in its influence and its power, but not the power of reading, not the power of printed material. We're seeing more reading from students. We're seeing them engage more and more online with technology, and that technology is focusing more and more on the words and understanding and meaning of those words and being able to infer and understand what's going on. They have to develop this close reading skill. They have to be able to measure their response to what they read and be able to apply it in their education. To do that, they need to be able to reason. They need to be able to take the evidence that they're gathering from the reading, to be able to process the complex texts, and be able to identify what outcomes, what expectations, what developments need to come from that reading. Where do they go with that information? How do they reason? How do they apply? One of the things that we're seeing is the change in how reading and writing are integrated in the new standards. The second resource we have up here gets into the idea of how writing prompts have been measured. On the left hand in the column, we're looking at the narrative prompts from state tests. And our comment is that they rely on imagination and personal experience. They're expressive writing, they're creative writing. And those are key things for students to be able to develop. But what Common Core is looking at is expression based on analysis, expression drawn from the texts. So when you look at the middle column and the right column, we're seeing examples of Common Core state standards and prompts from the two consortia, PARC and SMARTER, in which we're seeing more expectation that the students are responding to materials in their writing. Not just making things up, not just imagining, both important skills, but also being able to develop a concept based on what they read and respond to it, and develop that idea through their writing. Up here in the right-hand corner, the link I didn't open goes to the Common Core State Standards for English Language Arts. This was mentioned in the beginning. This dialogue will be up and available for people to access. If you want to check the standards, take a look at what they're talking about, see how they relate to what we're telling you here. That information is available on the resource link for each of the subject areas. So as we conclude with ELA, I want to move forward to math. And in math, the expectation is to achieve fluency with standard procedures. We all learned how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide, how to apply content, but those things all are expected to develop a greater fluency for the teachers or for the students, that they know when to apply these procedures, that they know the background behind the procedures, that the information that they're working with is based on an understanding of the sources of the mathematical rules, that they don't just memorize a rote solution to a specific problem, but that they understand how solutions to problems are developed, and they develop that skill themselves. They know when to apply different solutions and different procedures to make the right choice, to make the right conclusion. They also need to be able to explain their answers. We've talked for years about being able to show your work, but this goes beyond simply showing your work to understanding why you made the choices you did in the process. Why did you make a certain decision about calculation or computation? Why did you choose certain theorems? Why did you choose certain principles to try to solve a problem? And developing that understanding and that reasoning helps them to then develop a greater capacity for applying math beyond individual lessons. To do that, one of the things I'm going to show you here just briefly, and we'll come back to this dialogue later, this is an instructional dialogue that, again, goes into the purposes, and here the purpose is explaining a mathematical principle and helping, in this case, both teachers and students to understand what its implications are in the Common Core and how to develop that content and that understanding. Like I said, we'll come back to this dialogue later, so we will also see Cavalieri's principle again. From math, a little bit about science and social studies. Again, Common Core State Standards have not identified science and social studies separate from literacy. They have incorporated elements of it into the literacy standards. So they're extending that literacy, and specifically for these two subject areas, the extension is domain-specific vocabulary, in that there is terminology and phrases and wordings that are specific to science and social studies that go beyond what common everyday usage of the words are. So what we're trying to do is develop that literacy so that students can read more complex texts targeted to a narrow specific audience. That domain-specific vocabulary will help them as they try to understand and represent information. Being able to use correct terminology will help them put information out there that will be received by those who are up to date and current on that vocabulary. The other aspect of information that's key in science and social studies, to some extent in language arts as well, but even more in science and social studies, is the ability to represent information beyond text, to represent graphically, to represent conceptually the ideas, the elements that are present in science, the historical periods, the overlap of cultures that are present in social studies, being able to represent that information in visual formats and table formats, maps and graphs and charts, all of that, the literacy with those resources, again, in the information age, make it a much more compelling presentation of fact and position. Again, the complexity of the texts here is going to be based on technical reading. Students are going to be doing things that are specific to these subject areas, where they're going to have a high proficiency with language, they're going to have a high proficiency with understanding the concepts and being able to apply the things that they've learned before to these texts, to be able to take the information they already have, integrate it and synthesize it with the information being presented in the text, and be able to apply that information beyond. Again, the link here is just the section in the Common Core State Standards about social science and science literacy. The other standards we mentioned a few times here, but I wanted to get into a little bit here, is just the next generation science standards. This is not just the abilities and the skills of comprehending information in science, but this is the actual content, the materials that science is engaged with. So one of the things that they're looking to do with the next generation science standards is to get the students to employ scientific and engineering practices, to use the actual skills and processes and abilities that scientists and engineers employ in their work to make their instruction and their assessment and their development of these skills more authentic, more accurate to the way in which science and engineering is done. We want to deepen their understanding of scientific concepts. We want the students to understand at a conceptual level what these things mean. Not to simply memorize facts, not to simply recognize things, but to be able to apply them, to be able to recognize when the concept is a factor in things that are going on in their scientific observations, in their observations of the world around them. The environment that they're going to live in and the circumstances that they live in will be informed by their understanding of the concepts, and the more they know and the more that they can apply, the more rich an experience it will be for them. We want to engage them with fundamental questions about the world, the systems and operations of the world around them, the environment and the system of life, the system of energy. All of these things are things that they want and need to understand because they influence everything else. The climate and the environment that they live in makes for some of the economic and social choices that have been made by societies from the beginning of time. So the information that they're gathering in science helps to inform other areas and other aspects. Lastly, we want students to engage in carrying out scientific investigations. We want them to be actually practicing science. We want them to be implementing the skills and the practices and the scientific concepts in real examinations, real investigations, and developing the ability to reason and to identify why things turned out a certain way. What were the conclusions? What were the hypotheses that came about in the process, and how did those carry over to the end result? What was developed by their investigation? What did they learn and what did they figure out? A link over here to the Next Generation Science Standards. Again, this link will actually take you to a page that's waiting right now because they've pulled the final public draft and they're waiting for the final version to be published, and we're eagerly anticipating that. Again, based on the standards, as soon as those are available, they'll be implemented in our system and all content will be evaluated and new content will be developed so that we align to the Next Generation Science Standards. We've come to our second question and answer period. So I'm going to look to see what questions we have here. A couple things have been passed to me. The question is the Cavalieri dialogue available for use now? The version that I have in the dialogue right now is in process. I believe that the writer's moved on and it will be available in the next week. He had started working on that as something that was an outstanding example of where Common Core is going. It should be something that should be published next week for you to use in your classroom, to use with your teachers to help build that understanding and present that material to students. Another question that we received. The question is, would we be able to produce graphically interactive activities such as the ones that you're seeing in the dialogues? And yes, that is a possibility. And again, there's a variety of resources that can be added. The development of those things is obviously dependent on the technology and skills of each user, but any of them can be added by end users if they have that capacity. Some of the things we're going to see today require a little more proficiency with things like Flash or with some scripting languages, but a lot of it is just implementation of animated GIFs or implementation of graphics or links to resources. We'll see some examples of some animations and videos later that you can, if you have that content, if you have license to that content, or if you built it yourself, you can attach it and present it within the dialogues. All right, I'm getting the sign that we're a little behind the schedule, so I want to keep everybody on pace, so I'm going to move on. Again, if you have other questions, please continue to submit them. There will be responses made to all questions after the webinar if we don't get to them in the session today, and we do appreciate all of your insight and input, so please continue to ask questions, and we will answer them as soon as we possibly can. So the third section we're getting into is how to enhance curriculum and instruction. And the question is, how do dialogues aid curriculum development? Well, I've mentioned it a little bit before, but we'll go into a little bit here. It's the ability to share these resources, that the time and effort that somebody takes into putting a lesson, the time and effort that somebody takes into building a unit, the time and effort put into curricular materials, all of this can be shared. And it can be shared within your school, It can be shared just between two teachers. It can be shared between everybody in the district. It can be shared, again, across districts and across states. With Common Core, we're seeing an opportunity here where everybody can produce materials aligned to these similar standards. Everybody can benefit from that. And then there will be an endless amount of material to choose from. We have search systems, we have organizational systems, we have structures that will make it easy to find, easy to access, and again, easy to modify as needed to fit your specific needs in your school, your district. The content is all aligned to standards. It can be aligned to the curricular plans. Again, you can develop these in a hierarchical way so the curricular plans and the standards that are supposed to be addressed are identified, the units are identified, the lessons within the units, the activities within the lessons, and the student materials all can be integrated seamlessly to allow the standards to be measured, to be evaluated, to effectiveness to be determined, and then adjustments to be made. The searchability I mentioned before, again, instructional and resource materials are accessible. Some of the resources that we build for dialogues and some of the resources that you'll build for dialogues appear in a dialogue that you intend, but they can be repurposed multiple times, and we'll show you some examples in a later slide about how that works. The two links I have here are just some guidance that we're providing, models that we're working on in designing curriculum. So designing a Common Core aligned curriculum, again, just some guidelines. This whole process, the entirety of this dialogue, which we won't have time to go into the whole thing here, allows you to work in a workshop format with teachers to develop where you stand now, where you want to be, what are the things you need to consider, how do you want to organize it, and just build that process so that everything works in an organized and orderly fashion for you to get a curriculum aligned to Common Core as soon as possible. The materials that you can access from us, the materials that you can build for yourselves, all of those things can be integrated into this plan. The second set here just goes into a more specific unit plan, how to get into those units, things to work with. Again, recognition of what Common Core expects and evaluation of whether the materials that you're implementing represent those expectations and whether they'll be able to measure to the degree we're wanting to measure the student's ability to develop those skills and abilities. How do dialogues enhance instruction? Well, one of the things is to teacher-led lessons for guidance, led lessons with guidance for instruction. I'm going through a teacher-led right now. You're my audience, you're hearing and seeing the things I'm sharing with you, just as students in a class would, just as your colleagues would if there were a presentation for them. This is something that's going to be more presentational. Again, if we go back to Cavalieri's principle, as we work through it, we can see the directions and information provided here for the teacher. There's a version that the students will see that doesn't contain this information. It'll be accessible through this dialogue to reach the other information. So here again, summary for the teacher of what's going on, how we're going to approach instruction. And I do apologize if I'm going through these fairly quickly, but again, they will all be available online for you to view. We just want to make sure that we get everything covered today before we take up too much of your time. The prerequisite knowledge and new concepts, establishing where we're coming from in order to develop the understanding. A description and explanation of the format that this dialogue is going to take, again, for the teachers to recognize what principles are being employed in instructional methods. And then we move into the instruction and the relationship to what the students are going to see, again, with notes for the teachers in this version of the dialogue, allowing them to fully work through it. It's very difficult to adopt somebody else's materials without some guidance, and so we are working to develop that material so that there is clear and explicit direction that's provided that then teachers can modify and adapt to their own circumstances and situations. Again, following through to the answer, moving on to additional concepts. So again, this dialogue is developed both for teachers to use to develop an understanding of what they're going to do and how they're going to work with it. And again, for a lot of teachers, this isn't necessarily necessary, but there's always going to be new teachers, there's always going to be transitions where somebody was teaching a particular level and moves to a new level. So these resources and these notes are very useful in expanding the capabilities of staff. The second way we use dialogues to enhance instruction is student-centered lessons with interactive elements, letting the students work at their own pace, sometimes outside the classroom, sometimes in a homework situation. The example I want to show you here, drawn from our science content, is a history of the atomic theory. So again, establishing what it is the students are going to be expected to gain from this dialogue, moving them through some information as we work into the law of constant composition. But one of the things we're getting here is an opportunity to do a little differentiation. Students who maybe don't recall or didn't attend the day that we talked about the law of conservation of matter, or the days that we talked about the laws of conservation of matter, have a quick link here to content about it. Here it's a single slide of a dialogue, but in other cases it may be an entire lesson. If the students missed something or if the students don't recall something, there's flexibility within the dialogues for them to step to the side, take some information in. There's also some room for expansion type activities where students who are already understanding what's going on in the dialogue can maybe move into another course of information and expand their knowledge even more. Went too far in closing that. Wanted to look at a couple other resources here. Again, the use of images, the use of graphics to help the students represent and understand the information. And we move into interactives. So here we've got a situation where the students are going to experiment with electrons. And so we're turning on the power to the high voltage source. And we see our result over here on the fluorescent screen. If I introduce a magnetic field, I see the reaction. If I introduce an electric field, I see a different reaction. And again, the students can change the situation, alter the settings, so that we're seeing different reactions in the experiment. Also got to remember to turn the power off when they're done. As we continue to move through the dialogue, we again see more information presented. We get into a situation where the students are being checked for understanding. So they think that we're going to go with question C as the answer. Again, we see feedback coming from the system when they're making a choice and making an incorrect choice. Again, allowing them to move backward through the dialogue, reevaluate the information, and in this case, make the correct choice. Wanted to move to one more slide in here to show, and that's not it. Here we are. Again, I mentioned before the incorporation of audio and video. I'm going to turn the piano down a little bit there. I don't want to give away the ending. So we're going to go ahead and move on. But again, addressing the concern about technology and implementing multimedia, these are things that can be done. Again, Galileo is going to develop a lot of this content because we have the resources and we have the trained people to do it. But it's something that we can engage with districts in training, work with them through the process of developing these resources so that their dialogues can also contain the same levels of interactivity. Mentioned before already the opportunities for differentiated instruction. You can make branches off of dialogues where students can pursue. You can get them to a point where they are asked some questions, and based on the responses and reactions to those questions, they can be directed to go to different aspects of the dialogue to either remediate or to expand on their knowledge. And again, that can all be individualized so that students can be working at a different pace, either outside the classroom or in a lab or in a situation where they have computers available to them, so everyone isn't tied to the exact same presentation. The last option here, dialogues enhance instruction by engaging in performance-based extended constructed response. And again, this is big in Common Core. We're looking here, this is a project just to do a research paper, but again, something that can be shared. The resources are developed, the materials, the notes, and everything developed by one teacher, but can be applied to multiple classes. Anyone studying William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, the play, can obviously access this. There are multiple dialogues in our system already relating to Shakespearean plays and other classic works of literature. We're going to continue to expand that because, again, we're seeing the rigor of these materials are in line with what Common Core is expecting. So again, the steps spelled out in the project, resources attached. Again, the teacher can make choices about what the students need to have access to. Here they want them to be using the MLA formatting guidelines for this research paper, so the link is provided right there. Again, links, images, multimedia, documents, all of those things can be provided in the resource section. Lastly is employing collaborative technology. When we're talking about collaborative technology, again, we're talking in Galileo about the dialogues. There are other ways to do this, but this is the one that, again, we're going to present with and show you how we work with it. How do they support collaboration? Well, we're going to provide models. Other teachers will provide models, and that can be a starting point for the development of additional content. Resources can be repurposed. Strategies and tactics that are employed to teach the Common Core can be repeated and adjusted based on grade level, adjusted based on subject. So all of that amount of content that we develop and all the content that our participants choose to share is readily accessible. We are able to distribute, reorganize, and revise content. We're able to put things together for a unit for an entire year. And then as we see instruction take effect, when we see the development of student abilities, we can reorganize that and we can determine where things need to change from year to year, from quarter to quarter, even from week to week. If we decide that certain things are working effectively or not working effectively, that material can easily be reorganized and revised. And revision can happen again at a class level, a district level, whatever the choice is made as to how to create a common curriculum that is responsive to individual needs. The shared text and interactive elements, again, I showed you a couple examples. I'm going to show you just a couple more here. These are things that, again, we built for a specific process, a specific project for us, but they can be applied to multiple scenarios, multiple grade levels, multiple subject areas. So here you have an interactive. It's, again, allowing the students to see proper names for the bones. If they choose one of those, they can work then into greater detail about the specific bone, this area of the skeletal system. And they can get back to the original. They can work with different elements. And even here it goes further beyond from the humerus. We get into the joint system. All of this material, again, can be shared, can be repurposed, it can appear multiple times. So maybe you reference at the beginning of your presentation, the middle, and come back to it again at the end. Those links can be made easily using the technology available. The second interactive I wanted to show you is our weather map, again from elementary science. Students are introduced to the ideas of the weather map and then asked to make some forecast maps. For example, we're going to start with Phoenix with sunny skies, which is a real surprise for none of us. So we're going to grab the sun and say a little sun in Phoenix, and we've got some high pressure. Well, I'm going to mistake that. I'm going to think that's low pressure, see what happens. Again, interactivity, a little responsiveness to the students. The students know when they're doing it right or they're doing it wrong, and they can adjust their responses accordingly so that they see the development of correct responses. I forgot one more thing. We've got Phoenix is under high pressure resulting in sunny skies. Now if I check my symbol, now I've got the right forecast. Sunny in Phoenix, who would have thought? Moving on to the second one, again, I can look at Buffalo. Buffalo is a low pressure system in snowy weather, so I get to use my low pressure system at this point. And a cold front through Fargo. Now I've become a moderately competent weatherman. Again, allowing the students to actually engage in the practice of doing this rather than simply seeing it on a static image, a static set of materials. Again, those resources can be shared. The other thing that we can do here is, this is an online workspace. Anyone with access to the internet with a Galileo password and settings can get in and can build content, and they can share it with others. So maybe you split up the task of developing curricular materials, developing lessons and units, and each person takes responsibilities. You can then go in and there's a feature that allows you to provide commentary back and forth to each other, to make notes, to suggest edits, to make changes, to do all of that work collaboratively. So you don't have to be in the same room. You don't have to find a sub. You don't have to find the time to get everybody together. All of this can be done virtually. It can be done asynchronously, and all of it can then be evaluated and implemented into your curriculum. When all that is done, then you have a resource that can be shared with your colleagues and develop further content based on that and work from it. So the question at this point is, what are the next steps? Where do we go from here? And for that information, I'm going to pass you back to Jody.
This concludes our webinar for today. We really would like to thank you for participating, your comments and questions. We do have a lot of questions regarding a recording of the webinar today. And yes, the answer is we will be posting the recording of the video on the ATI website. We appreciate your comments, and if we were not able to get to all of your questions, we do apologize. Please know that we will respond via email with detailed responses. We would like you to join us for our next webinar focusing on implementing comprehensive instructional effectiveness assessment system. This is scheduled on March 26th, again at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. We'd like you to know that ATI will be hosting a summer training. It will focus on instructional dialogue technology and Common Core curricula development. Watch for these dates and times again on the ATI website. We appreciate your participation today, and thank you so much for attending.